So I'm excited for this episode because I think it's so important to talk about mental wellness specifically for men and boys and how we approach it, and the fact that it's it's just as important for men as it is for women. And this idea that men shouldn't talk about things or should push it down, or that there's something not masculine about having emotions is it's wrong and
Yeah.
it's harmful to our society because
Yeah.
we put this on our male children, our on our boys,
Yeah.
that don't be a baby, don't
Yeah. Tough,
cry,
tough,
don't have
toughen
emotion.
up, toughen
Yeah,
up, just toughen
stuff
up.
it
Just,
down,
yeah, suck it
which,
up. Yeah.
yeah, sucking it up or stuffing it down is a recipe for disaster. And so
Yeah.
we got to stop doing that for our boys. But also, suicide rates around men, middle-aged men in particular, are crazy right now. So
Yeah.
this is not working. And I'm
Yeah.
so glad that Simon is talking about it with
Yeah.
us today.
Oh my gosh. That was such an eye opener for me. I think the biggest thing I learned from this conversation was about OCD, obsessive
Mm-hmm.
compulsive disorder. I always, he explains how many times we would just kind of blow it off. Oh, that's OCD. We make jokes and memes about it, right? But
Yeah.
it's a real thing. And he tells the story about what happened to him as an 8-year-old child.
Mm-hmm.
And his OCD began, and it essentially ruined his life for a long period of time.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to love to hear about this.
Yeah, and it's so important for us as parents and grandparents and people in our children's lives to have some awareness around these things, so that, because somebody could have maybe helped him with that when he was 8 instead of him not really being able to work on it till he was 40. So
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
it's great warrior parent stuff to
Yeah.
learn about these things. The more we know, the better we can do.
Yeah. This is a good one.
The world is a lot right now. Are you feeling it? We all need new tools to help us walk through the chaos with grace, ease, and compassion for each other and for ourselves. In this podcast, you'll hear from parents, educators, and other experts who can bring perspective to the monumental job of parenting. It's time to level up and be warriors for our kids and our communities. This is the Warrior Parent Podcast. I'm Marci Mitchell.
And I'm Debbie DiManno. As parents, we understand that it really does take a village to raise our kids. We hope that this podcast serves to create and support that community for you. Join us as we discuss and practice our core tools, which are proven mind-body techniques that can be used by anyone to improve your life on a daily basis.
Welcome to the Warrior Parent Podcast. Today we are speaking with Simon Rinne, a men's therapist who has lived with mental illness for over 30 years, depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and burnout. He started Mindful Men in 2021 to share his story and help normalize discussions around mental health. Love that. His aim is to encourage boys and men to open up, get vulnerable, and deal with the issues that are troubling them. His therapeutic approach is informed by his lived experience of mental illness, but also his life as a husband, father, and bloke. He's a qualified social worker and has 15 years experience in the Australian Public Service, including working with the Department of Home Affairs, Australian Border Force, and more recently, the National Disability Insurance Agency as a senior planner. So welcome, Simon. We are so grateful to have you here today.
No, thanks for having me. It's nice to be here, and I'm really looking forward to unpacking parenting and everything that's happened in the lead up to my parenting journey, and hopefully inspire some other parents, particularly dads out there, to maybe,
Yes,
live their best lives. So thanks for having me.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Wow. So Marci and I don't get many opportunities to interview men on this topic, actually. This is one of a few.
Mhm.
So we are super excited that Simon's here. And by the way, if you didn't notice, Simon is from Australia and it is 6 a.m. for Simon. So we woke him up. We called him out of bed, and he's here to have this wonderful conversation with
Yes.
us. So, Simon, we're super excited. I got to spend a little bit of time over the weekend understanding what Simon's all about. And I love your website. I love what you're doing. Hopefully, you're gonna rub off on some Americans through this
Yes. So important.
conversation.
Yes.
Man. And the title on your website says it's okay not to be okay, breaking the silence of mental health for men. So tell us about your journey. How did you get here to be such an inspiration for men?
Yeah, it's a quite a journey. So I turned 40 last year, so strap yourselves in. We've got a bit to go through. But I'll give you the highlights. So yeah,
Okay.
born and bred in Australia. And I grew up in the 80s, 90s, and noughties. So that's kind of like my playground. So a land before internet, really.
Hmm.
The social environment that I grew up in was, you could say, lower socioeconomic. So it wasn't hugely wealthy. A lot of people in my areas would be either unemployed, there'd be single parent households, a lot of drugs, alcohol, gang violence. It wasn't a great place to grow up where I grew up, and for the majority of my childhood, I was absolutely fearful, scared little boy. But I didn't know
Hmm.
how to express that, because in that era and that location, what it meant to be a boy and to be a man was to be someone who is tough, strong, to suck it up,
Yeah.
harden up. We've all been told these as boys and as men. So we just need to bottle all of our emotions up,
Yeah.
and not talk about things. And this, for a lot of my youth, particularly leading up until 8 years old, that was fine. That's all I knew. And it was reinforced at the schoolyard. It was reinforced on the sports field as well. We played a lot of sports. It was reinforced in the home. So I had three brothers and dad, so very masculine household,
Mm.
very jockey. So we played a lot of sports. So Australian rules football, athletics, basketball, soccer. We did all these types of things. We'd
Lots of
watch.
lots of stinky shoes around the house. Yeah.
Absolutely. And mum,
Yeah.
mum used to hate it. And, I felt sorry for my mum living with five guys in the house. But that was the kind of environment. So when we have our environments, the way that our life kind of goes from there is dictated by those environments that we grow up, particularly in those early years, much like attachment theory in those first 0 to 6 years, in terms of how we connect with people, particularly our parents.
Yeah.
Our environment, our context is really important on how it shapes us in the future. And so
Yeah.
I always like to start with that, because as a social worker, context is really important. And that's why whenever you go to a therapist, they say, tell me about your childhood, because they're
Yeah.
trying to understand what environment you grow up in,
Yeah.
to essentially have these social constructs implanted in the back of your
Yeah.
brain, and teach you how to live and be and behave and so forth. So that's
That's
my context.
those are the modeling years, right? That's really when
Absolutely.
everything is happening. The brain is forming all the things.
Yeah.
There's so much
Yeah.
going on in those formidable years, right?
Absolutely. And our understanding of the world comes from those years. And in
Hmm.
Yeah.
fact, it comes from day one. Like when we're born, and I'm a parent, so I've been in this situation as well. If it's a boy, you get a blue t-shirt. If you're a girl, you get a pink t-shirt. And
Yeah.
so from day one, we're socially constructed to be and act in a certain way. And for me,
Hmm.
it was the typical boy, young Aussie boy who wanted to play footy growing up, wanted to be a sports star. Never happened. I'm still chasing that dream at
Yeah.
40. Um, Now it's on the couch though, not on the sports field. But yeah, that was my context. And so up until 8, mum would say, you're a pretty happy-go-lucky kid, Simon. Nothing phases you. You're always happy. You're always smiling.
Hmm.
You're always laughing. But then at 8, everything changed for my entire life. And so I was in the schoolyard, and another student walked past me, and he said, Simon, if you stop using your voice for more than a minute, you're going to lose your voice forever. And
Oh,
most people would just go, that's just silly.
oh,
They're not going to deal with it. I'm not going to believe that. But
yeah.
me, my brain thought that was going to happen. Like I really
Hmm.
believed it. I didn't even know this student. He just walked past me, said this, and I'm like, wow, like I'm the happy-go-lucky kid. Mum always says this about me. I can't not use my voice. So enter obsessive compulsive disorder. And
Mm.
so this is quite a OCD. We often know it as OCD. It's often a very
Yeah.
misunderstood condition. It's
Right.
often trivialized or even popularized in social media. People say, I'm a
Yep.
little bit
Yes.
OCD, or people say,
Yep.
my OCD is killing me because,
Right.
my pen has a black lid on it, but it's a red pen or a biro.
Right.
And things like that, really trivial stuff that isn't really OCD. It's just how you like your pens, or your desk is nice and neat. Or if you're at work and your desk is messy, someone might say, "Oh, my OCD is killing me because your desk is messy." Like,
Mm-hmm.
really stuff that isn't OCD. So for anyone, who's not sure what OCD is, it starts with an obsessive thought. So for me as an 8-year-old, it was this obsessive, intrusive, anxious or anxiety provoking thought that I was going to lose my voice if I didn't do something about it. And so that's the obsessive thought. We can't get rid of it. It goes around and around and around.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes.
To alleviate that anxiety is to perform a compulsive behavior. So this is the C in OCD, to perform a behavior that you have to do in a certain way to alleviate the anxiety. And for me, that was humming. So every minute or so, I would go like this, mm, mm, just checking
Mm.
that my voice was there. And I have to
Yes.
do that hum in a certain way. So, when you're talking and maybe you get a bit of a frog in your throat and it croaks, for example,
Yeah.
Mhm.
if I did that hum and it sounded a bit croaky, I would have to do it again because it didn't quite hit that tone. So it had to be a certain tone. So the ones I just did for you were the tone. But if
Mm-hmm.
it kind of was croaky or broke, and I mean, if I was sick, then that was going to happen all the time. I would have to do it and do it and do it and do it. So it becomes a compulsive behavior. You do it
Yeah.
over again. And this is why people with OCD, they have to repeat things so many times
Mm-hmm.
because they have to do things just right. And if it's not just right, it's better. We've got to start all over again. And it becomes a disorder. So this is the D in OCD. So it's not something that you just do once and you're a little bit OCD. Like you have to do it for over an hour a day. So it has to be over an hour, so it's time limited. And it has to have a significant impact on your day
Yeah.
as well. And that impact can be physical, like actual, the time, but also the distress as well. And so internally, I became this hugely distressed child. And the reason for that was I didn't have an outlet to talk about this thing. So I never told anybody, hey, mum, dad, or teacher, or therapist, whatever that was in those days. No one knew what a
Yeah.
therapist was.
Yeah.
Right.
I,
No.
I do this weird humming thing. I'm scared that I'm going to lose my voice. And so that was reinforced by those environments that we talked about. We don't talk about our emotions as a boy or these quirks that we develop as a boy. And
Right.
definitely I wouldn't take it home. I remember being at home, and if I cried, dad might say, stop crying, stop being a girl.
Yeah.
Stop being a wuss. And that would be in the schoolyard. If you saw someone crying, they'd say, suck it up, or stop being a girl, stop being gay. These are the things that young boys were labeled with back then.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully that's changed now. But I dare say it probably hasn't changed to a
Not
lot
as much
degree.
as we like, probably.
Yes.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
this is my entry into OCD. And OCD has stuck with me. I'm a 40-year-old man now. I don't hum anymore. So this took about a year and a half, 2 years. I was doing this for about 2 years. And not one single people collectively said anything about it. Nobody knew about it. Well, at least if they did know about it, they've never spoken to me about it as well.
Interesting.
And so this is the start of OCD. And please jump in it because it is a long story, and it winds and twirls and goes all over the place. But
Yes.
I'll try
That's
to keep it on
life.
track. But
No, we want to hear it.
it is life. And so in my teenage years, around 13, mum and dad separated. And so me and my little brother, we went with mum. And mum became the single parent household that we'd often see in my neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And she'd have to rent a new house, and she would have to go and furnish that house with old secondhand stuff and stuff that we couldn't afford anyway because we didn't have any money. But
Mhm.
somehow she did it. I don't know how she did it.
Mhm.
And there was this notion at the time, I'm not sure if it's still around, is of having a man in the house. Every time I went to a friend's house, there'd be a man of the house. Oh, dad's the man of the house, or an older brother or an uncle or a grandparent. They're the man of the house. They're the ones we have to follow.
Mm.
All of a sudden, I didn't have that. And so I took it upon myself to be the man of the house as a 13-year-old boy. And I was just petrified at this role that I put on myself. Nobody ever asked me to do this. And this is where OCD really went to the next level and became a huge problem in my life. I mean, it was a problem with the humming. I was doing a few other little quirky things as well, but nothing like I experienced in my teenage years. And so every night to make sure that we're all safe, I would go around and lock all the doors and check all the windows, draw all the blinds. I would do that for about 3 to 4 hours on average every.
Oh, oh,
And so what that looked like was me going, say, maybe to the front of the house and checking that every window was closed, every blind was closed, because I worried that if the blind was slightly open, there might be someone on the outside who comes up to our house with the intention to break in and either steal our stuff, which we didn't have much, hurt us, kidnap us, kill us. These were the things, these were the obsessive thoughts that went through my mind as a 13-year-old. And to alleviate that was the obsessive checking of the house, making sure it was like Fort Knox. Nobody could get in, nobody could get out,
Yeah.
And so I'd
Right.
walk around and do the whole loop of the house, every door, every window, making sure it was locked. I'd even started going outside and checking gates in the middle of the night as well. Checking that the car was fully locked in case someone broke into the car. It wouldn't be unusual for people to break into cars. And I'd get to bed after the first loop, and my OCD brain would say, Simon, did you really check that window in the lounge room?
wow.
And I couldn't just tell myself, yeah, I've already checked it. I had to actually physically go check it. So I had to get out of bed, and it wouldn't just be that window, it would be the whole house again, because it has to go in a sequence or an order. You can't just do one thing, you have to do the whole lot, because everything's connected, right? And in an OCD brain, everything's connected to that kind of degree. And then to add fuel to this fire, I also had this obsessive thought of us burning down in our sleeps. And how that would happen would be maybe the iron was left on, and something might, I don't know, magically a breeze come and land on that, and it creates a fire. Or we had this really old fridge with like an inch thick seal on it, like almost like those 60s Coke fridges that you used to see.
Yeah.
Really old school, but the seal was a little bit broken. And so I had it in my mind that if that fridge wasn't closed exactly right, that would cause the motor to overheat and then burn down. So I was always touching the fridge, pressing on it, all sorts of spots, and to find that just right feeling that it was closed. Or the stove, I'd check that the stove was off, or the oven was off. Even now as a 40-year-old, I still do this, but I'm turning off at the moment like phone chargers, like, because I'm worried that they're going to overheat. Because I saw a news article once with phones or laptops just spontaneously combusting, right?
Yeah.
So this was my teenage years, and that extended.
I'm exhausted, by the way.
Yeah, clearly you were not getting any sleep because which is makes everything worse when we don't get
I was exhausted.
sleep.
I was exhausted. Then I'd have to get up and go to school the next day.
Yeah.
And, on the way to school, I'd have my bag on my back, and I'd have at the time it was my wallet and keys, because we didn't have phones or anything like that. But I would put my wallet and key in my bag and be walking up the street to school. And my brain would say, Simon, have you got your wallet and key? You've got to check that, because that's your way to get home. Your wallet had your bus ticket in it. Your key has obviously the way to get into your home and be safe. That's your safe place.
Yeah.
But I'd constantly be checking. So I'd take my bag off my back and open up the front of the pocket on my bag and go, yep, I've got my wallet and key, close it, put it on my back. And then my brain would say, Simon, in the process of doing that, your wallet or your key fell out of your bag. And so I'd look back, and then I would check my bag again and over throughout the school day. So I never escaped it in the school day as well, like always checking. And the reason I'm doing this again is because I worried that if someone got my wallet, they might have my address might be in there. So then this mysterious boogeyman that I call him might know where I live, so he can come and steal our stuff and hurt us, kidnap us, murder us.
Burn down the house.
Yeah. And if he's got my key, then he's got the means to get in the house.
Right.
And so then
Wow.
that might turn into my OCD barricading doors and windows, which to some degree I did as well. So this is my teenage years and my early childhood years, and at around 15 found alcohol. So alcohol be kind of, it started as the social thing. We're all getting drunk, we're all having parties, it's very fun. Unfortunately, my alcohol use coincided with the release of American Pie, the movies. And so I always had this fascination with these college parties, because we don't really have them here in Australia. People go to university. I went to university, then I went straight to work, then I went straight home. Like it wasn't a thing. You don't live really on site unless you're an international student, for example. Or you live maybe in rural Australia and you have to travel in for boarding school or something like that. And so I always had this fascination with these college parties. Everyone looks like they're having so much fun. And I used alcohol to kind of relive that in my own life. So I'd get silly, like stupidly drunk. And everyone would have so much fun about how drunk you got. And this kind of plays into Australian drinking culture. We have a huge drinking culture here. In fact, it's such a big issue here that it's unusual if you don't drink. And people would ask questions if you don't drink, like, why aren't you drinking? And so
Yeah.
I was that guy. I was kind of like that Stifler guy. If you could picture me at a party, I'd walk in, everyone's cheering, everyone's like, yeah, how's
Yeah,
drunk
there he
Simon going?
is.
Yeah.
The life
So
of the party. Yes.
initially it was fun, but what came over the next 25 years is me using alcohol to slow that
Oh, my
OCD
brain.
brain down, to
Yeah.
quiet it so I can go to sleep, so that I
Yep.
don't have to do 500 checks of the house at night, so
Yeah.
that I can feel normal and feel like I'm a normal person. I can engage in conversations at social situations, because it also became like a social anxiety as well, like
Yeah.
struggling to communicate, talk, have the small talk, which is, interesting now as a podcaster. I do this all the time and I haven't had a drink, for several months, in fact, since last year. But in social situations at parties, I just can't do it. Like I feel weird. And so
Mm.
alcohol became my blanket, my safety blanket.
Yeah.
But things turned around when I started, well, actually, they didn't. Well, they started turning around at 28 years old. So from 8 to 28, it was all undiagnosed, untreated. Nobody knew what was going on. And it became a point when my now wife said, Simon, you've either got to go get help or you've got to get out, because,
Yeah.
your drinking is out of control. This checking behavior is out of control. It's not real. You're not really the person who I first fell in love with. And she'd been saying that for about 2 years. And for 2 years, I did what most Aussie blokes would do, and most blokes around the world would say is like, "No, I'm okay. It's you. If there's an issue, maybe
Yeah.
you need to go and talk to someone about it. I don't need to
Yeah.
do anything
I'm
about
good.
it.
Yep.
I'm good. I'm tough. I'm strong. I'm fine." And I wasn't fine, and I hadn't been fine for 20 years. And after 2 years of my wife, I don't want to say nagging, but it's probably the best word, to go and get help, I thought, I had this light bulb moment in myself, and I said to myself, you know what? I don't want to lose this relationship. I love my wife. I've got to do some stuff here. I've got to start asking for help. I've got to find out what's going on. And so I went to my doctor, and one of the hardest things I've ever had to say was to my doctor, and I said, I think I have a mental health issue going on. And growing up, I didn't have mental health as a thing in my vocabulary. I didn't know what mental health was, and it just so happens that by 2012 that I knew what that was, because it was in the media a little bit.
Yeah.
That's it, pretty
Yeah.
much. Not at workplaces, but definitely on the news every now and then. And so going to the doctor and saying, I think I've got a mental health issue, was a huge challenge for me. But it really started almost 11 years, 12-year process now of me starting to heal and work on myself and going, you know what? It's okay to be not okay. I can move through this. But initially, in those first few days, I'd get medications, I'd go to a therapist, and I expected all of that to heal me, like a big magic wand would come in and
Right.
fix me. So I didn't really do the work until I became a parent. So becoming a parent in 2017, we had our son, who coincidentally is 8 next year. So we're in those first early years, his happy-go-lucky years, I like to call them. And then
Yeah.
I'm always wondering what happens next year when he turns 8. This is when my journey started. And so having a son and then having a daughter as well, really shone a spotlight on what I was doing, how I was showing up in the world. Coincided with burnout in 2020 as well. There was a lot going on. So my mental health story, I was working full time in a really high pressure environment. So that was that disability and agency role. I was studying my master's of social work at the time. We had this little thing called COVID happen, and lockdowns and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But burnout made me stop, because I had to take 4 to 5 months off of work. And what I realized is that I could no longer be this perfect person that I had in my head. And that perfectionism came from the OCD, the just
Yes.
right, of everything having to be just right.
Yes.
I had a huge benchmark for who I was as a person, but also who everybody else needed to be. And if nobody hit that benchmark, my world would crumble down. And I got to a point where my world crumbled down. I could no longer jump up and touch that benchmark either.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so from there started, to really do the work. I started to do the homework that the therapist would give me. And I started to explore mindfulness and found the benefits of that. I started to really look at my medications and go, how is my medications impacting me in terms of my mental health, but also my physical health as well? Because when we take meds, there's a whole lot of other symptoms that happen, or a lot of
Yep.
other side effects that happens as well. And I discovered that I was lonely, and so discovered these things called men's groups and men's retreats, and the need for men to have quality connections. And so all
Mm.
these things started happening after becoming a dad. Or I don't think they happened. I think they just came to the front. All of a sudden, I'm
Yeah.
like, you know
It
what? I've
was
got two.
it was part of your evolution, right? Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So so many things show up at those different stages of your life.
Yeah.
Well, because you're not only forced to or given an ultimatum or whatever, but ultimately, right, you're choosing to do the work. Right.
Yeah,
And there's so
yeah.
many, I hate to say, but so many men who, just like you said, like, no, 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 I'm fine. I got this. I can't show my vulnerability. I can't, I can't show up weak. I can't cry. I can't let anyone know. And so it perpetuates this cycle, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of like my Phoenix Rising moment, like me getting out of my own way, taking off my mask and saying, you know what? I'm not okay. I need
Yeah.
to express
Yeah.
some of these emotions. I can't keep burying them with alcohol. And I think that was the ultimate, the final thing that I did was I started working on myself more often, trying to get that 1% growth every day, trying to be the better dad and the better husband and the better friend. But ultimately, when I turned 40 last year, that was also the prompt that I've
Mhm.
finally got to say, I've got to give up the alcohol. I've got to stop using this as a coping mechanism
Yeah.
Mhm.
and start really looking after my health, both from a mental and a physical perspective as well. So change up the sports that I did or the exercise that I did, but really give up the alcohol and start
Yeah.
nourishing my body instead of just abusing my body to
Yeah.
try and hide from the
Yeah.
OCD. Depression
Mhm.
was along the way many times,
Yeah.
anxiety, the burnout as well. And so 40 years in a nutshell there, and I'm happy to unpack anything of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really wanted to highlight the journey, the evolution, as you said, because it is an evolving thing, our mental health. It's not something that just we get and
Yes.
it stays stagnant. It evolves. And OCD for me has evolved so many different ways over the years, from the humming to the checking to there's stuff around my car, there's stuff around pure obsessions as well, and rumination that I haven't gone into. But
Yeah. I
yeah,
want to interrupt you for a minute
yes, please.
because please make me stop. You're perfect, by the way. You're spot on, and we're having so much fun listening to you. As I was doing some research, you spoke about because you speak about all of these mental issues as and they're all sort of woven together, right? It's pretty hard to just say, I just have this one thing. It's just OCD, or it's just anxiety, or it's just depression, or it's just
Right.
right ADHD, right? Which we
Mhm.
haven't spoken. I love the fact that you've spoken a lot about OCD. We really haven't had a lot of discussion about that. But what you speak about, and something that I'm passionate about, is ACEs, the adverse child disruption piece. And I didn't even, it's kind of a big thing in the States. We probably talk about it more than anyone, but apparently there must be something going on in Australia around ACEs too. But you suggest that ACEs are correlated with ADHD, that the dysregulation comes from that. So have you taken the ACE test yourself? And do you think that has something to do with it? So you speak of this one trauma, but I imagine if you're growing up in a household with divorce and all those other things, you end up having a pretty high ACE score, right?
Yeah, I haven't actually done the ACE test, and I actually don't
Mhm.
know anyone who has. So,
Oh,
so yeah, I can't really speak to that. But I guess it started off with that one trauma, and I've never really looked at my piece as a trauma piece. But the older I
Yes.
get, and I start looking at all these events, and I'm like, there's multiple traumas, like just starting with that schoolyard thing. And we think of trauma as
Yes.
this big, profound thing that's happened in our life.
Yes.
Maybe a big car accident, for example. That's one that everyone goes, oh yeah, that's trauma, a trauma
Right.
event. But
Right.
for an 8-year-old boy in the schoolyard to hear this thing that's created a trauma response, that was my entry
Yeah.
into trauma. I never really pieced this together until now as a 40-year-old therapist.
Yes. Yeah.
And then moving out of home, and then all the little things that happened along the way, and relationships that failed, and a lot of that was probably me, but also them trying to put me in different boxes that I shouldn't be in. It
Mhm.
was the undiagnosed mental health challenges, the alcohol, all the issues that happened with alcohol, even going into therapy. So in 2012 was when I got the diagnoses, and
Mm.
it started off with the depression, the anxiety, and then this OCD thing, and then not one therapist actually treated the OCD.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was the
Oh,
continuous trauma of living with OCD and going to therapists and experiencing therapy, but not actually treating the underlying thing. Everyone focused on the
yes.
depression, which is
Yes.
in the men's mental health space. We focus on depression, we focus on addiction, and we focus on suicide, and we focus on family and domestic violence.
Yeah.
We don't focus on anything else.
I'm
And
curious, excuse me, I'm curious if, so by 2012, if you knew it was OCD, was that in your vocabulary yet? Had you, so
no, never even
you didn't
heard
know
of
what it was?
OCD.
Okay,
No,
interesting. And
no.
so and when did you say you were actually diagnosed that it was OCD? Was that it when, in
That was
12?
2012. So I
But they
knew I had
still didn't treat
depression.
it.
No, I knew I had depression. I didn't really know I had anxiety, but I kind of go, okay, I accepted that. But
Makes sense. Yeah.
when they said I've got OCD, I'm like, oh, what's this? And so I started learning about it. And what I come to learn about OCD is it's called a silent condition. And so it
Mm.
takes on average, I think it's between 13 to 15 years from first symptom to first treatment for OCD. So mine was actually
Mm.
around 30 or so years. And the
Wow.
reason for that is because it's so distressing. It's so, me saying about the humming thing, like I laugh at that. I know a lot of people don't know how to laugh at their OCD or their mental health because it is so disturbing. There's so many themes for OCD. So there's harm OCD, for example, and that's the obsessive thought that you're through your actions, like maybe you're holding a knife in the kitchen and you're going to inadvertently stab someone.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you don't want to stab someone. You just start getting this thought. What happens if I stab someone? And so you put the knife down. You avoid the knife. The flip side of that, and this is the case for me, it's the absence of my behavior will cause harm for somebody else. So the absence of me checking the house a million times
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
will cause harm to everybody living in his house. Or the absence of me putting up my car handbrake as tight as possible, no matter where that car is going to result in that car rolling down a hill and causing mass chaos and killing people
Yeah.
and damage and so forth. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's other ones. There's ones around sexuality. There's religion ones. There's one around pedophilia. Now as an OCDer, we don't believe that we're these people. It's just our brain trying to dictate or trying to trick us into believing that we're immoral, unethical, and so forth as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so this was untreated. It was diagnosed at 28, but untreated. And so that trauma history continued, me trying to
Yeah.
figure it out in my own. And it just happens at burnout. And I thank burnout for happening because
Yeah.
that enabled me to take off my mask to start with, start
Yeah.
talking about it.
Yeah.
But then
When you're
from there,
when your
sorry.
body's starting to shut down, you don't have a choice about figuring this out, right? You can go to every
Yeah.
doctor, every person on the planet, right? And that
Yeah.
was me too with a lot of my health issues. Is like looking. Somebody has to figure this out, but ultimately, we all know it becomes an inside job, right?
Yeah.
Like you ultimately kind of have to figure some of this stuff out for yourself. I know you speak a lot about some of the tools that you have used for yourself, and then you speak about how men can use the tools. Marci and I are all about the tools. So we love the tools. We have a platform for the
Yeah.
tools, all of it. So talk about some of the tools that you might use in some of the men who come to you for all of the things that you talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk about OCD first because this kind of leads into where we're going.
Yeah.
And burnout, when I burnt out, I took the mask off, created a social media platform, so Instagram, to start sharing my story. And
Yeah.
I even went back into the workplace and did some presentations on burnout and men's mental health because I felt like that was just really necessary.
Yeah.
But in creating the Instagram page, like most people, when we have a mental health condition, we feel like we're the only person in the world
Yep.
to have that condition. No one's ever experienced OCD. No way. This is so weird. Why
Yes.
would anyone else think about humming to themselves as an 8-year-old? Like, it doesn't make sense. But creating the Instagram page, you know how it starts feeding you people that you
Yeah.
might want to follow. And I'm like, oh, someone else with OCD. Oh, someone else with OCD. And it continued. And I'm like, I'm loving this. Like, all of a sudden, I don't feel so alone
Yes.
in the world. There's the community of people
Yes.
just like me. And they were all talking about this thing called exposure response prevention, or ERP, which comes under the cognitive behavioral therapy umbrella, which is the most used and most evidence and most researched therapeutic tool in the mental health space. So CBT.
CBT. Yep.
So ERP, so CBT focuses on your behavior, your thoughts, trying to understand your thoughts and work out different ways of looking at that thought, and that naturally calms the body down as well, as you can start to rationalize things as opposed to living in the emotional brain, which is where I live most of the time.
Yeah.
ERP focuses on behavior. So in the OCD space, we want to prevent the behavior. So it's exposure response, which is the behavior prevention. And the exposure comes with the obsessive thought. So the O in OCD, we're going to get those no matter what. That's going to happen. But what we want to do is focus on the response, because our response reinforces the obsessive thoughts. And so me getting out of bed when my brain says, Simon, did you check the front door? It's me reinforcing that obsessive thought over and over and over again. So in the OCD space, ERP, and there's a lot of acronyms now we're throwing out. So exposure response prevention, that according to Instagram people was the gold standard. And I'm like, I've never heard of this. And no therapist has ever talked to me about this. And so I did my own internal work, and I found an ERP therapist where I live, and went to there and said, okay, I've got to tackle this. I want to focus on ERP for my OCD. I've heard of this on Instagram. Can you help me? And that really changed my world in terms of getting right tools to manage OCD. So for example, instead of me going around the house and checking things in a specific order, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that 1 being the front door, 2 might be the oven, 3 might be a window, etc., we'd start disrupting the pattern and start telling my brain that I'm in control. And so it might be that we go, one night, if I'm feeling really good, and this is always when you're feeling good, you don't want to do it when you're just having a rubbish day and it's through the roof, because it's not going to sink in. It's not really going to work. I mean, you can try, but it can also cause more distress than good. So when I was feeling good, it would be mixing up that order. So I might be doing it backwards, going 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or it might be 1, 3, 2, 1, 4, 5, and hopefully I've just did that right. I just tried to mix it all and jumble the numbers up as well. And then if I'm feeling really good, it might be actually skipping one of the numbers. And this is huge for someone with OCD and has to do with things in patterns. For me to skip a window or a blind causes a huge amount of distress and so forth. And so getting comfortable with that, also talking, and we say this as therapists, when you can verbalize your internal, it actually disempowers the internal as well. And so me standing at the door at 1 o'clock in the morning saying, Simon, you've already checked this. This is your OCD out loud. And I'm hoping that my kids aren't hearing or my wife isn't hearing, really disempowers it, because it gets it out of your head. Because an OCD and any mental health condition, a lot of it is played out in our heads. We go over and over and over, and it becomes a
Well,
nightmare. And so
those pathways run deep, right? So
Neural
you're doing
pathways.
you're doing a rewire,
yeah,
right? And
absolutely.
that's hard work, right?
And
Yeah.
now we're stepping into neuroplasticity and trying to redefine those neuron
Yes.
pathways to have a different outset
New
and
story.
a new story. And that is hard when you've got something that is so ingrained for the better part of 40 years. And this is what I'm seeing a lot of the guys that come in. And so that was OCD, that was ERP, that was my stuff. Mindfulness has certainly helped. A lot of grounding myself in the moment. So an anxious mind for me is on a different planet. So I'm often on a different planet. My family could be talking to me, friends could be talking to me, but I'm too worried about yesterday or too worried about the future. And so coming and using my 5 senses, What can I see, smell, touch, etc.
Yes.
That's been really useful for me to just ground and couple that with breathing techniques. So I'm really loving the physiological sigh at the moment from Dr. Andrew Huberman, which is the 2 breaths in and followed by a long breath out. That's really helps me just go, whoop, I'm off on a different planet. I've got to center myself, got to come back down to earth.
Yes. Love that. Love
So
that.
these are some of the tools that I've been learning. And then as I finished my social work degree, really discovered acceptance and commitment therapy. So that's another umbrella under the umbrella of CBT. And that's values-based and mindfulness-based therapy, essentially, and a way of living. And so I started looking at values and personal values and how can I live by my core personal values every day. And
Mm,
this has been a great therapeutic approach because I've taken this into the work that I do with guys, because a lot of the
yeah.
guys that I see in my therapy practice now that have similar stories, they maybe have always bottled everything up because that's what they know and it's become part of their identity. Like I can't
Yeah.
talk about this stuff. And in fact, a lot of the phone calls I get are from wives and daughters and mums saying, I've got this guy in my life, but he just won't open up. And like, I know, I've
Isn't that
been
how it
there.
is? No,
I've
Marci,
been
we
there.
have to drag our husbands along too. Like, okay, it might be time for
Yeah.
this. It might be time for that. I wanted to make mention. I'm concerned we're running out of time, but I didn't want to not talk about this. But and this is inspiring for me. You talk about especially new dads, who come to you, suggesting that they want to do parenting better, right?
Yes.
Like they don't want to do it the way their parents did. Not that everyone wasn't doing their best, but talk about those new dads. I want to hear some inspirational stories if you can.
Yeah, well, I guess some of that is that identity piece of losing their identities. And
Mhm.
this is why I do values-based work, because we can reconnect and go, who are you as a partner, as a dad, as a
Hmm.
friend, as a bloke in 2024, or whenever you became a dad? How does that differ from when you grew up? So for,
Yeah.
I get a lot of guys around my age. Okay, we talk about the 80s and the 90s, and I've got some older guys say, tell me about the 70s, tell me about the 60s. What was going on? How is that different from today? And what is your identity saying about all that as well? And so this is where values is really good. We always start really with values and go, who are you as a
Yes.
person? What are your core, and how do we live by these core values? And how do you want to apply that to your parenting as well? And so for me,
Right.
one of my values is wellness. And so me looking after my mental health, but also my physical health, doing things with my kids and my wife is all about wellness, me living wellness every day. And so we impart that to the guys that I work with as well, the new dads, and say, how can you use your values to fill your cup every day so you're not feeling depressed or anxious or stressed or burnt out or all these types of things? How can you reconnect with that true version of you? Who are you as a human, not just as the last person in line now and at the dinner table, because mum comes first, bubs, the dog comes first. How can
Yes.
we how can we bring you back and make you feel worthy? And so there's a lot of that values, a lost sense of self.
Wow.
We talk about so parenting challenges. So I work a lot in the disability space, and so
Mm.
there's a lot of behaviors that children are expressing. And maybe also that's because the dad has a disability himself as well. So we look at how disability interplays, and that can be physical, that can be intellectual, cognitive. It
Hmm.
can be a psychosocial disability as well. So schizophrenia, it could be OCD. I see one of my clients has OCD as well. So I love that conversation because we just unpack all
Yes.
the OCD
Oh,
and
yeah.
what that looks like.
Yeah.
But how does that also interplay with parenting and our children and their behaviors? And a lot of it comes back to letting go of the way that we were parented, which could be the quick aggressive dad that snaps and says, pull your
Yeah.
socks up, don't be soft or whatever,
Yes.
Yeah.
and a nurturing one, someone that encompasses that
Oh,
nurturing, mothering. It's okay, son or daughter. It's okay, but also letting them see your tears as well.
yes.
Well, isn't that
Yes.
what you talk about though, that there are, and this is a big one for Marcy and I, about emotions, right? And teaching the young children about emotions, that you have emotions, what to do with those emotions. You suggest that there are no bad emotions, there's just bad behavior as a result of the emotions.
Yeah,
Correct?
absolutely. It's the response. And
Yeah.
we talk about this in anger a lot. So anger is common when guys come to therapists. They've got an anger management issue, and I'm working on with a dad at the moment. And so we look at anger as it's an emotion. It's not necessarily a bad emotion. It's just our response. It's the way that we
Yeah.
process it, with the way that we identify maybe we're getting angry. So are we recognizing that our emotional distress is rising? And then we go, okay, what's a way that we can bring that down? What's a way that we can keep it down on a regular? And that's through the basics like self-care, but it's also around engaging with therapists and other supports as well. And how can we then, support our children to recognize that as well, our sons particularly. And my son is turning 8 next year. How can we show him that it's okay to show all these emotions and feel them,
Yes.
and even the ones that make us cry? And I said that before for a reason. It's like, if I'm sitting here on the bed or the lounge and crying, like, I'm okay with my son and my daughter seeing that now, because
Yes.
Yes,
they can see that
yes.
dad's just a human too. And in
Yeah.
fact, that's me also not hiding away from my own emotional distress as well. So it's a lot of it's leading by example and really
Yeah. So
unpacking
important.
our context and understanding that, but also recognizing that a lot of the stuff that we were taught to suppress is actually a healthy thing to talk about and deal with. And for guys, recognizing that it's not weak to speak, for example, that it's actually a positive, healthy thing. And I wish I did it when I was 8, because maybe I wouldn't have evolved into so many mental health challenges. But I
Yeah.
recognize that my family didn't have the mechanisms to talk about this type of stuff. In
Yeah.
fact, society where I grew up didn't talk about this type of stuff as well. So it's not me
No.
pointing my finger at my parents. It's me
No.
going, that was the cards that I was dealt. This is
Yep.
how we can make a new deck of cards now,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
as as we get older and evolve, and then show the way for our children so that they don't have to
Yep.
hopefully make the same issue or have the same issues that we did. But in recognizing that if my son next year develops a mental health issue, I know how to support him through that.
Yeah.
I'm
We
I'm
can talk
right
about it.
there with him. I don't want him to bottle up. I'll show him that it's okay. We'll get the help that he needs, and my
Yeah,
daughter
and
as well.
that's what all of your challenge equipped you with, as you say, you base it on your 30 years, and that's
Mm,
what makes you a leader at a time when men really need this. And
yeah.
so there's men who are there now to be able to help them come and talk, but then also bringing in the boys, bringing in the new generation, and hopefully they don't have to go through all the stuff that you had to.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Amazing.
I talk with guys from 8 to 68, 69 at the moment. That's my caseload at the moment. And
Wow.
the stories are all very similar, no
Yeah.
matter which
Yes.
generation it is. Even the older generations, they're like, Simon, I felt like this for so long, but it's finally nice after 50 years to actually talk about this.
I
So many of
love
these
that
guys
someone
are,
69 has come to you to work on this,
yeah,
because it is never too late, and
yeah.
that's so important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and particularly in Australia, we've got an aging population.
Mm,
We call they're the grey nomad generation, the baby boomers. That we've got, like, they
yeah.
called it a grey tsunami coming
Yes.
of
Yes.
impact on our healthcare system, our aged care facility, our medical systems as well. And so there's a lot more older guys coming in, as I said, and for the first time, they've never talked
Yeah.
about this stuff, but
Well,
recognizing that it's time to
they're
start talking.
probably realizing like I want to have a different relationship with
Mm.
my grandkids,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yeah.
right? They're probably being inspired by their own children, even though they didn't have the tools. But now you start to see this generational jump, right? And that's where the magic happens. That's where the beauty
Yeah.
happens,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and you mentioned ADHD before, and that's for a lot of the older generation and dads and grandparents. They're getting their children or grandchildren assessed for these conditions and recognizing in themselves,
Yeah.
oh, hang on a second, I'm doing the same
Yes.
things. And this is
Uh-oh.
resulting this is
Yeah.
resulting in those late diagnoses that we're
Yeah.
seeing in
Yes.
ADHD and ASD, particularly, so autism as well.
Hmm. Yes.
And that's what I'm seeing in my therapy clinic. They're like, oh yeah, I got my son or daughter and assessed, and now
Yeah.
I'm here as well. And and
Yes.
and this is, I think, a lot of people say they don't like labels, they don't like diagnoses because it's stigmatizing. I find it's empowering.
I agree.
It
Yes.
certainly empowered me. We don't have to embody it. We don't have to really live it.
Yeah.
I think I've gone past the living it now to just wanting to let it go, and it is what it is.
Yeah.
But so many people get stuck in it, but that's okay. But I think knowledge is power, and so
Yes.
getting these diagnoses can only lead to working out what's going on and ways that you can target that. And there's different horses for courses as well. Like what works for me is not going to work for
Yeah.
Yeah.
somebody else, and so it's
Yeah.
about just opening our minds and our bodies and our hearts into what is the world presenting? What can I do? Is it breath work? Is it therapy? Is it meditation? Is it mindfulness? Is it just talking? Is it more exercise? Is it what
Right.
can work for us so that we can just live our best lives?
Oh my
That's what
goodness.
it's about.
I think you just summed it up, Simon, and that was perfect because we're out of time, but I could listen to you all day.
And we definitely need to have Simon back because I feel like we just barely touched on a lot of this. And I think this issue with mental health for men is so relevant right now. So I would love for us to have you come back, give more of the tools, talk more about how men can make that jump, and then that other very important piece of how we're raising our boys too, so that this isn't an issue that they have to deal with, this closed down inability to talk and share and cry in front of us, because that's the past. We need to let that go.
No, I really appreciate you having me on. I have gone all over the place. Like that's a mental health story. Like it's all over the place. It's messy. It's all, some days you feel like you're going up, other days you're down. But really happy to be here and happy to come back and share more insights into the men's mental health space.
We will definitely do that. For now, tell people where they can find you. So we know you're in Australia, but do you do online counseling? Can somebody anywhere else in the world reach out, and how would they find you if so?
Yeah, the best place to find me is at my website. So it's www.mindful-men.com.au. So that's the Australian website.
Okay.
In terms of therapy, it's because I'm a social worker in Australia, it's really defined, restricted to Australia. So I do therapy in Australia. I am looking at coaching and getting into the coaching space for the international men around the world and women who want to work with me as well. That's coming hopefully this year, maybe at the start of next year. But outside of that, I have got the Mindful Men podcast. So I have these conversations every week with guests from all over the world, trying to inspire men to go, you know what? Oh, they're talking about depression, or they're talking about OCD, or they're talking about addiction or disability or parenting. Maybe it's time for me to look at what I'm doing in my own life as well. So check out the Mindful Men podcast as well. And we're all over most social media platforms as well.
Excellent. We're going to put those links on the show notes for this episode so people can find that. Thank you, Simon. What a great conversation.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Yes. And now for a moment about meditation and how it can help you and your family to self-regulate and mindfully return to a place of calm and centeredness. Our Cour Tools platform consists of a number of proven tools and techniques that are designed to reduce stress, anxiety, and overwhelm in spite of what's going on in your world. Meditation is just one of these powerful tools. And through a special partnership with Donna Appadoni, we have created a group of meditations available only on our platform and via Donna's own website. Here's Donna.
I glide with ease, effortlessly, from one phase of my life to another. I am grateful for all of it. Hi, I'm Donna Appadoni. I'm the person who writes and produces meditations that are used by Cour Experience. What are you grateful for today? We all have something we can be grateful for, but it's pretty easy to overlook the opportunities, all the nice people we know, all of the good things that happen all around us every day. This meditation is a reminder to look for the good things. They're there. And when you can, say thank you to someone. It makes you feel good. It makes them feel good. Even if you just think thank you, it's still a good thing. Make a mental note that something good happened today. Be grateful. And remember, whatever's happening with you right now, you can do anything you set your mind to do. I remember that glitter is not essential. I remember my purpose. I continue to define my purpose. I carefully consider my options. I trust. I trust. I am grateful for all of it.
Donna's book, called Drive Time Meditations, is a collection of 183 of her purpose-driven motivators. Drive Time Meditations is available on Amazon.
Thank you for listening to the Warrior Parent Podcast. You can find us at courexperience.org. Make sure you join us next week for another informative conversation to help you and your family show up mindfully, purposefully, and joyfully with each other and in your community.
Our meditation segment is produced by Donna Appadone with music from Scott Holmes. The full collection of meditations is in Donna's book, Drive Time Meditations, available on Amazon and at donnaappadone.com. Thanks to Samuel Hale, LLC, for sponsoring this podcast. Technical and marketing support comes from Inspire Your Brand. Our podcast editor is Justin Beedman. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of the hosts, producers, or financial supporters. I'm Debbie DiManno.
And I'm Marci Mitchell. The Warrior Parent Podcast is a production of Cour Experience. If you resonate with the idea of creating a community to help support kids and families, won't you join us by following the podcast and sharing this episode? You can even write a review. It truly does take a village, and we appreciate you.